Hello and welcome to the Franchise Tag. I am Gareth Smith, and today I'm joined by a very, very special guest, agent for 30 plus years in the NFL, Craig Daman of Your Pro Mindset. How are we doing?
Wonderful, Garrett. It's we got a little bit of time difference going here today. It's already
We
time
do.
for you to have a few beers and celebrate your favorite team signing a free agent or agreeing to terms today with a free
See,
agent.
I'm an Eagles fan, so we've not really done anything yet. I'm just still living off the high of New
Holy,
Orleans.
that's
So
not even, dude. I'm a Chiefs fan. If I knew you were Eagles fan, I don't know if I'd have got on this thing.
I was in New Orleans for that as well, and it was just, yeah, absolutely incredible experience to be out there for that. And to basically, and it was funny, even though it was a very one-sided game, I was still in the third quarter. I was going, "It's the Chiefs. It's still Mahomes. Anything is possible." And the other lads were like, "It's over, Gareth. Calm down. You've won." But also my soccer side or football is Liverpool, and we're top of the Premier League as well, and miles clear. It could be a hell of a year for Gareth. That's all I'm saying. But anyway, we move on. So we're talking, obviously, free agency has started. There's been some massive, massive moves already. Is there anything that surprised you so far from day one? And obviously, I know it's not over yet.
Whew. Well, here's the only thing that is perplexing to me. If I'm a Seattle Seahawks fan, I
Ah,
can understand get moving Geno, bringing in Sam Darnold. That totally makes sense. But when you
hmm
shift out DK Metcalf, who would be a quarterback's dream,
yeah,
I just feel like maybe Sam Darnold didn't have a lot of options. Because
yeah.
if he had options, you got to go somewhere where the offense is going to rock, where you can continue this momentum he built up in 2024 with the Vikings, and you can't do it without a good receiver. So I would say that the
No,
Seahawks are probably not finished.
no. And you look at some, don't get me wrong, I quite like Jackson Smith and Jig, but they've got that, and I actually quite like their running game. And you start to wonder, are they going to be leaning more towards a run first kind of offense, and the quarterback's there to just do some bits here and there? So it's quite interesting that they've basically kind of gone, Tyler Lockett, we think you're getting a bit old these days, you're not quite as good as you were. DK Metcalf, you are an absolute beast of a human and absolutely huge. But unfortunately, we need to get draft capital. It is an interesting time over there in Seattle. But when you compare that to the team he's gone to, the Steelers, who we don't know who that quarterback is yet, but how good do you think that offense could be if they do get a good quarterback with DK Metcalf? If they Pat Fryermuth, you also have if Pickens stays. How good of an offense could that be?
I think I you normally don't see a lot of drastic moves by the Steelers organization. But the last couple years, there's almost been like a volcano of activity of like,
Mm,
we got to make some changes on our offense. So Justin Fields obviously committed to the Jets.
mm,
Russell Wilson is still available. Aaron Rodgers is still lurking out there.
yeah.
They got something up their sleeve, just hasn't been announced yet. Or they're down to the wire trying to, it's those two guys are playing games a little bit with the Steelers to try to get some more money. But it'll probably be one of those two guys. But the Steelers do have a good receiving core, as you
Mm.
mentioned. Uh, I think I saw Najee Harris was heading out of town, though.
Yeah, because obviously he had a decent last season, but I think other than that, I think we can say he's been not quite what we expected for them. But I think last year was a bit of a turning corner, and haven't they also lost isn't what Warren also out as well at the moment? So do they even have a running back
They
on the
may not.
roster right now? So that again, that's another interesting piece, which I think, as the Eagles are demonstrating, a running back is an important thing still in the NFL. So it's curious how a team like that can. But then they've always been that team who builds based on having an elite defense, and big play Slay is also signed over there as well, which is an interesting move, which has gutted me a little bit seeing him leave the Eagles, but I think our cornerback room is all right with those two young guys we've got over there now. What do you think of that move for Slay going over to Pittsburgh and that fairly tough defense?
Here's the thing: when you've been around the block as long as he has, you take the best opportunity and you get the most money.
Yeah.
You can, you saw what Washington did, made a few moves and made it
Mm.
to the playoffs. Everybody in the league, probably but about two or three teams, thinks they can be the Washington Commanders in 2025. So it could be the Steelers. So as a older dog, in terms of age and whatnot for a player, he's got to go where he can get paid because
Yeah.
the money, you can't get that kind of money in the real world.
I wish you could get that kind of money in the real world, tell you. But then you also look at another team that you mentioned the Commanders there, which is an interesting one. But but there's another team I think has made a lot of really good moves in the NFC in shoring up their offensive line in the Chicago Bears. How interesting do you think they could be going into this season? Could they be the Commanders of this year, or will they be the Bears that we always know and love?
At some point in time, Chicago is making so. If you look at their free agency and their draft over just the last like 16 months, nobody's changed the face of their locker room more than the Bears. And so they went out and got skill guys last
Mhm.
offseason, got their quarterback in the draft. Now they're shoring up their offensive line with, Thuney and this Dahlman they signed. Um, you know what? They got no excuses. At some point in time, they got to start winning. I think it'd be really good if they had a better tight end. I
Yeah.
don't think they have an elite level tight end. He'll get a few touchdowns here and there, but he doesn't stretch the defense. He's not. He's not. He's not a Kelsey in his heyday. Back to probably before you were born in 1985, they've always been a defensive team. They've always had a
Mhm.
defensive identity, very similar to the Steelers.
Yeah.
And when you got an elite talent like Caleb Williams, you got to change the mojo in the locker room. You got to change your offense so that you can light up the scoreboard a little bit.
And I think to be fair, to the site end, Cole Kmet, I think the best he's ever looked was when he was over in the UK playing in the game in Tottenham Stadium. That was probably the best game I think I've ever seen him play. But then part of you do wonder whether that's the Jags, who again have been an interesting prospect this off season with Kirk moving on, Ingram moving on. Like they're two of their best receivers in effect, with Ingram being one of the more productive tight ends in the league. You do wonder what they're doing over there in Jacksonville and what is going on. I know, obviously, new head coach. They always want to come in and make their own standpoint, but what's going on over there at Jacksonville, which as a Brit, we have a lot invested interest in.
You do. I think the biggest issue in Jacksonville is the quarterback.
Okay.
You know, Trevor Lawrence um, had a good year and got paid.
Hmm.
But guys love of the game, and I'm not. This is not an indictment on his character or on his love of the game, but I don't see it. I don't
Okay.
see it. I'm not seeing him do what guys do that want to play in the NFL for a long time. He got
Hmm.
his bag of money, and I haven't seen anything since then. So I think the biggest question mark for him is not the people around him. It's not the O line, it's not the running backs, it's not the receivers. I think, how is he going to show up in 2025? Because what I see with the quarterback position, unlike like in football, where you've got 10 on 10 basically with keepers in the NFL and in an NFL locker room, there's one dude.
Hmm.
You change that one dude, and that's your quarterback. He can he can elevate the entire team. He high tide rises all boats. The guy that you need to do that is your quarterback. Trevor Lawrence is not doing that.
No. And it's speaking obviously quarterbacks as well, who I don't think potentially are looking like them potentially going to be the guy at the moment. And there's also a lot of rumours about the Colts and what's gone on over there in regards to, because they were heavily linked with Justin Fields, who has obviously now gone to the Jets, and they've been rumoured to be around other fairly mobile quarterbacks. Is it a case of they just want to somehow find a Jalen Hurts themselves, and they're just trying anyone who fits roughly that mold? Because what's going on over there in regards to like the Colts in that space?
Well, I think the Colts have a solid defense. I think their struggle is at that position as well. And they went all in. I mean, they put all their poker chips in on a quarterback that started 8 games in college.
Yeah.
On a quarterback that was coming out early. On a quarterback that was like 21 years old.
Mm.
And honestly, I don't think they knew. I mean, they were hoping, but I don't think they knew what they were getting in terms of leadership, commitment, all those things behind the scenes, all the intangible things that make a difference. And so they might be making a little bit of a shift to cover their bases in case he doesn't grow up,
Mm.
so to speak. And, their head coach came from the Eagles.
Yeah.
And they had a lot of success. It's a weapon when you can have a dual threat quarterback.
Oh, it is.
Jalen Hurts is a tough cookie to defend.
Yeah.
Everybody says, "Oh, he's not accurate. He's not this. He's not that." He's a Super Bowl winner. He's got weapons. There's no shame in handing off to Saquon. He's got 2 terrific receivers, and it's like he can run the ball better, as good as any quarterback in the NFL. So once you have success like that, and you move to a different team, you want a guy like that.
Yeah.
But there's not that many. I mean, Jalen Hurts is squatting 550 pounds. Jalen Hurts is hanging out with the offensive lineman in the weight room because he's such a dedicated, hard worker.
Mm-hmm.
Most quarterbacks are not like that.
No. And I think there's a lot of teams, as you mentioned, are wanting as well, because I think you look at the likes of Lamar Jackson, you look at Jalen Hurts, even the likes of people like Josh Allen, that back in the day probably would have been a pocket passer, literally be a pure pocket passer, but due to the size of him and all the rest of it, that I think the stay in the pocket kind of passing quarterback this day and age isn't what is needed anymore with the way the league has evolved. So it's interesting. Obviously, all these other teams try and pick players who are going to do that. And obviously, I think players that have looked like they could be those kind of guys. And you look at CJ over in the Texans, who may have had a bit of a down year last year, and obviously offensive rookie of the year, and Jane Daniels, who had what a first season in the NFL he had. It's interesting to see what your thoughts in regards to the pocket passer, what used to be the stereotypical quarterback versus the more mobile quarterback that we see on more of today.
I'm gonna break quarterbacks into 3 groups. The dual threat mobile quarterback. There aren't very many of those guys. The guys that are super athletes sometimes don't have great decision making, or they're think about what they did when they were 8, 10, 12 years old. They were so freaky that when they got the ball and nobody was open, or they just saw a hint of somebody coming after, they just took it to the house. That's hardwired in them over time. They get into high school, they're the best athlete on the field. They get recruited by, the Alabamas and Notre Dames of the world, and they can continue to do the same thing. Then when they get to the pros, so their running is developing more than their passing. When they get to the pros, it's a tiny field. I mean, it's still the 53 1/3 yards, but college to pro, you see in college there's so much space. Receivers are running wide open. Pros, nobody's open. Yeah. Nobody's open. It's like watching the NBA on a basketball court that's the same size as high school kids. It's a different floor, different spacing. So I think what's happening is there's just not that many guys that are great decision makers and have awesome accuracy that are also phenomenal athletes. Yeah. Then you got the guys that are the classic Tom Brady, Peyton Manning, Drew Brees. Man, if they rush for 100 yards in a season, it's a big deal. They do anything not to run the ball. They're artists at throwing the ball away. Hey, if it's not looking good and the pressure's getting heavy, they just send it, man. They get out of the pocket and send it. They throw it at somebody's feet. But I think what's the best quarterback in the NFL today are the guys that are in the middle. Mm-hmm. It's a guy that is a pocket passer when he needs to be a pocket passer. And he's an athlete when he needs to be an athlete. And the defense is going to dictate really the scheme of the game and the flow of the game, because if you take away, his ability you got a guy shadowing him or mirroring him, so he can't just run it up the middle. Then you got the edge rushers containing. They're really not trying to get to the quarterback. They're trying to simulate pressure and keep him in the pocket. That quarterback's got to be able to get rid of the ball quick. Then you've got the teams that they're bringing the house, and you got to be able to, and sometimes in zero coverage, and their DBs and their linebackers got their back to the quarterback. You got to have a quarterback in those situations that can make the defense pay for it by running the ball.
Yeah.
So I think the ideal quarterback is neither on the edges. I think it's the dude that's in the middle. Patrick Mahomes does it.
Yeah.
Josh Allen does it. Okay. These guys are equally good. I mean, Mahomes is not known for his running, but what does he do in the playoffs every year?
He breaks a run or two, at least.
Because they give it to him.
Yeah.
He hadn't shown it all season. So they go, well, let's make him run. Well, he can run.
Oh, he can't.
He doesn't want to run. So the bottom line is, I don't know, and you know this, it's tough finding a good quarterback.
Yeah.
What I would love to see, just for once in my life, and I'll never see it, I promise you, all 32 teams have a Super Bowl quality quarterback.
Be interesting.
I mean, still somebody's got to lose there's got to be a loser in every game. There's only going to be the playoff teams are going to be the playoff teams. There's going to be 2 teams in the Super Bowl, but it will be other factors.
Mm-hmm.
Where right now we can't find 32 guys on the planet that can do it at that level.
Yeah. I think the AFC is probably as close as you get to a larger pool of those kind of guys. When you obviously look at, you mentioned obviously Josh Allen there, you mentioned Patrick Mahomes, you've got obviously Lamar Jackson, you got Joe Burrow, you got CJ Stroud over there. That's probably, I think, the division that's probably the closest we have to, because I think if when you look at the NFC, on the other hand, it almost feels a bit like the wilderness, that a player like Jaden Daniels can just come in the first season, maybe be the second best quarterback in the division in his first year. And the only reason I'm giving Jalen is because Jalen went on to win the Super Bowl. Otherwise, you may have said that Jaden Daniels was the best quarterback in the NFC this season. So it's interesting to see, I think, maybe that the AFC is a little bit more stacked in that regard. But what I will say about the NFC is when the likes of Jalen Hurts has played those guys, he beats them. So, that maybe he's all right over there in Philadelphia, Jalen, in regards to his battle in the AFC teams. But we'll move on a little bit to talk about, obviously, we talked about there, you've already mentioned, obviously, where will Rodgers go? Where will Russell Wilson go? So obviously they're 2 big major stories still to be decided in this offseason. Is there any other major stories that you think are still out there or things that you're still expecting to see this offseason?
Here's what I think. If you're looking for a clue where there might be a very interesting move, you really got to look at individual teams and where their holes are, where they could not start the season today. And you might say, well, they're going to fill that hole with the draft. They may, okay? But there are just certain positions you can't fill them in the draft, okay? No guarantees. But if there's a big deficit on a particular roster right now, I see them making moves. There's teams are still trading. Teams are, what did Philly do last year? They picked up Zach Braun. Was he a big signing last year?
No.
Nobody talked about it. So I saw today where Kansas City got commitments from 2 players that are not prominent guys. One was primarily a backup offensive lineman from the 49ers, and the other one is, the 49ers got so many running backs. It's like they've got like the kid they drafted out of Louisville last year is their 3rd stringer now. And then they had 2 starters last year, and I don't know who's going to stay healthy. It'd be really smart to have a running back by committee and keep both those guys healthy the whole year. But Kansas City signs arguably their 4th running back, Elijah Mitchell. So the thing I'm trying to say is that who's going to be the next Zach? Who's going to be the next guy that nobody Nobody even notices. It's a 1-year prove-it deal, maybe a 2-year deal. And this young man comes in at 32 or 28 or whatever, it doesn't matter. He comes in and he makes a big impact on his organization. That's the thing that I would share with you that will help an organization make a big jump. Is not when you go sign the guy for 50 million a year, 30 million a year, whatever it is, and make him the highest paid guy. You expect that dude to be the guy.
Yeah.
Pittsburgh expects DK Metcalf to be the guy.
Yeah.
But who might they be signing that nobody expects to be the guy that makes a crazy contribution? Those are the teams, because there's so much parity in the NFL. I mean, yeah, there's a couple teams the Eagles are right now amazing, and then there's a couple teams that are really horrible. Everybody else is the same.
Yeah.
So who can make that signing? Good chemistry, good fit, good scheme fit. The player's healthy. He gels with his new coaches, and he comes out and lights he plays like his hair's on fire. Those are the teams you got to look for, because, do you play fantasy football?
Yeah, I do. I'm in a dynasty league, and I'm also in a normal redraft fantasy league. I'm far too emotionally invested in the dynasty one, though. That is the one that I need to maybe stop paying so much attention to.
Well, so here's the thing. You don't draft anybody in the first round that anybody else wouldn't draft.
Yeah.
You draft the same people everybody else, like in the normal fantasy turnover league. Everybody you draft, everybody drafts in the first round, everybody else would have drafted them if you didn't. It's like once you get that 6th, 7th round, can you pick the guy nobody else knew about? That's the same game NFL teams are playing right now.
Yeah, one of our lot, the year Puka Nacua came into the league and literally became Puka Nacua. He got him as a later round steal in regards to in the rookie draft on our dynasty league. He was very happy to be able to swap that guy for multiple firsts later on the same year, so he was very smug about life. But obviously, we talked about some of the teams are going to make moves and the rest of it. But you've seen this game from a very, very different standpoint. You have seen this free agency as an agent. Do you want to tell us a little bit about what it's like to be an agent during this period? Because I can't imagine you get much sleep during this time.
Well, here's the thing about free agency. Everybody thinks the biggest negotiation is with the team. It's always with your player, because their expectations are changing daily. Mm-hmm. Every time you get input and an opportunity or an offer or an interest from a team, your player sees himself differently. And so the hard part is, it's almost like you can't put toothpaste back in the tube. Yeah. After you go through this process and you get to the finish line, you can't go back and not have your client, hear something that he heard that influences his decision, because ultimately you want your client to make the best decision. Yeah. When you go to the combine, you might have 15 meetings with teams. 3 or 4 of them may not even be interested, but they're still meeting with you to kind of kick your tires to see if you're in, what's going on, what the market is. But you might have 10 teams that are seriously interested, but at the end of the day, when you start talking money, it usually gets down to 2 or 3. But is it always about money? Because if your guy it shouldn't be. If everybody's in the same ballpark, it should be about opportunity, fit, predictability for both sides. Teams want to sign guys that there's a predictable outcome, there's predictable performance. And as a player, you want the same. Everybody hates to go to first-year head coaches' teams. You don't know what you're going to get. Is this guy going to be like a hard ass and do stupid stuff just because he's trying to prove himself because he's never been a head coach before? So everybody wants to, just the 3 factors I would say that are the most important. Who's paying you the most money? Where's the best opportunity? And who wins the most? because the teams that win the most in the NFL have great cultures.
And it's interesting, obviously, you mentioned that there, because obviously that's where I think a lot of what the moves the Eagles have done this off season has shown that as an organization what they're about. And if I was a player, and this isn't just me being biased because I'm an Eagles fan, I'd be like, get me to Philadelphia because they pay their guys when they do well. They didn't have to pay Saquon yet, but they did. They didn't have to pay AJ Brown again last season, but they did. They paid Devonta Smith a year early. They've rewarded, obviously, Zach Bourne. As an organization, they seem to be a team that not only choose right pieces because Howie Roseman has some kind of magic going on there that we don't know, the rest of the league don't understand. But how they reward their players as well. That seems to be an organization, if I was a player, I would want to go to because they seem to reward them. As an agent, is that how you would feel as well, seeing how they treat their players?
Well, I think Howie's been doing this for a long time, even
Yeah,
before. Um, is it Chip Kelly that took
yeah,
over and kind of had him
yeah. Chip
demoted? Yeah,
Kelly demoted him.
Yeah, okay. Even before that, Howie's been playing Moneyball,
Yeah,
so to speak, differently than everybody else in the league by paying the players sometimes a year or two sooner, because as a player, it makes you love your organization better when they pay you sooner instead of making you wait. There's some organizations that wait to the very end, they franchise you. They franchise you again, and they just keep pissing you off. T. Higgins doesn't want to be in Cincinnati anymore. I promise you, he doesn't want to be in Cincinnati anymore. You know, depending on when they do this, Jamar Chase deal, he may want to get out of there at some point in time. It's always better to give him money earlier. And the cool thing for the organization is they always give him less.
yeah,
That's where the money ball comes in. Howie is paying his players less because he's paying them sooner. He's making a commitment sooner so he can say to you, hey, man, Gareth, man, you're going to be a top 5 paid whatever position you play. And you got 2 years left. Well, guess what? You might be the best player in the league, but you're
yeah,
thinking, I got to stick around for 2 more to get paid? I'm taking this money right now.
yeah,
And then the next year, the money goes up. The next year, the money goes up. If that player keeps ascending, then he's got to come back and do it again. And if he doesn't ascend and he plateaus, he rides it out or he lets him go. So
yeah.
Howie's done this forever, except for the couple of years that he disappeared in the business office of paying guys early, and the players like it.
Yeah. I'd love to get paid more without having to ask as well. I think that's quite a. So I mean, I think we all do somewhere down the line. We'd quite like to get extra money when we don't physically ask. We get invited in for more money. Who doesn't want to hear that? I think when you look at the team in the same division, seems to go the other way. Is the Cowboys? They always pay their guys, but they always pay them last minute, and as a result, always seem to pay a premium for them. Like the same division, two very different approaches.
Okay, so if we asked everybody in your fantasy in your 2 leagues, who are the top 10 quarterbacks in the NFL?
Yeah,
How many? You got 10 teams, 12 teams?
we got 12.
Okay, nobody's going to say Dak Prescott.
No.
He's the highest paid quarterback in the NFL.
Well, Josh Allen now he's took the mantle as of yesterday.
That's true. That's true. But how can Dak Prescott hold that title?
Don't know.
He's a good player. He's not the best in the NFL, but they're paying him the best because of exactly what you said. They waited.
And they've done the same obviously with CD. They waited, and there's talks of them waiting next year to do Micah Parsons as well if they don't trade off from him. It just seems to be they always want to be having the highest paid player in the position instead of doing what the Eagles do. So it's an interesting dynamic. But what I would like to talk about, obviously, we're talking about this time of year as an agent. You've also experienced this time of year as a father whose son was also going through free agency. How was that? And obviously, the fundamental differences between being as an agent and being a dad who's also advising, in effect, his son during this period.
Well, you got to be careful what you wish for because typically your kids think you're the stupidest person on the planet. So I've had numerous years to coach my boys, both of my boys, um, give them some agent advice even before they made it through college, during college. And so I've learned the art of basically, like, if you're my son, I'm saying, Garrett, I'm your dad right now in this conversation.
Yeah.
Oh, now I'm moving into being your agent. And I let them know, hey, dude, I'm talking from an agent perspective. Okay. When I'm talking as a dad, I love you. You do whatever the heck you want. If you want to play ball, I don't care. If you just have a happy life. But when I'm
Yeah.
an agent, we got to make smart business decisions. Okay. You gotta be smart about, when you get opportunities, which direction, what door you pick, what road you go down, all those type of things. And so I'm very straight, I'm very transparent, I'm very direct, but not before communicating to my kids that I'm acting as an agent in this conversation.
Yeah. And obviously, we've got the draft as well, not far down the line. Obviously, you've had players who've gone through that process. How would you prepare them for this? Because obviously, the combine and making sure they behave themselves during this period. Because obviously, what they do between now and the draft can't affect whether they become that first round pick or become a third, fourth, fifth, sixth, even undrafted. Um, how would you advise during this period? Because it must be tricky waters to tell these, in effect, young men what to do during this point in time.
It's really easy. Everybody sees the draft as a finish line. It's kind of like graduation. You know, Graduation is not the end.
No.
It's the beginning. The draft is not the goal. That's not the finish line. It's to build a career. So I encourage my guys to become pros now.
Yeah.
Become pros now. The draft is just a passageway. It's a weekend, Thursday night, Friday, and Saturday morning, where they find out where they're going to continue their career. But
Yeah.
you got to act like a pro. When I start working with the guy, he's got to be a pro from day one. How he treats women, how he treats his body, how he the decisions he makes off the field, and the things that he does to support his craft on the field. And so if you can get players to realize how important it is to be a pro, you don't have to remind them, hey, stay away from the bars and the strip clubs and everything else.
Yeah.
You just basically, hey, you got to be a pro now.
Yeah.
And then when the draft comes and goes, there's only two guys on draft weekend that are happy. The guy that gets picked first, because he's just thankful he got picked first, because he could have been picked second or third. But number two's not happy because he was so
He wants
close
to be
to
one.
being going one. Yeah. And he was talked about being one several times.
Yeah.
Okay. And the only other guy is Mr. Irrelevant, because when there's no other picks but one left, everybody wants that pick.
Yeah.
Right. So it's like everybody in between is like thinking they should have got drafted higher. They roomed with somebody at the combine. They competed with somebody at the combine. They played with somebody in college, and they thought they were better than them.
Yeah.
And the other player got drafted ahead of them. So everybody in the middle is kind of like grumpy, like, damn, I was the first pick in the fifth. I should have been in the fourth,
Yeah.
that type of thing. But it's like, regardless of how draft weekend plays out, you're going to have to show up at an NFL training camp, and there's going to be 89 dudes just like you,
Yeah.
pretty talented young men. And unless they change the rules, only 53 are going to have jobs.
Yeah.
So 37 are going to go on practice squad, injury reserve, or go home. So how can you be a pro? How can you portray yourself as a pro? How can you prepare? How can you practice with game intensity, game speed, even when it's in OTAs, even when it's preseason game number one, even when it's a little friendly scrimmage and beginning of training camp? It's all those practices that help you show up well on Sundays
Mhm.
during the regular season. You don't flip the switch on Saturday night before your first game.
Yeah.
You got to start that now, and you got to
Hmm.
live it now. So there's 3 levels of relationship with ball. You can like it. Those guys don't make it. You can love it. A lot of those guys don't make it either. You got to live it. And when you live ball, everything you do, you have to factor in the consequences of its effect on ball. If you do it or you don't do it. So, like, bottom line is, whether it's skirmishes with the law, it doesn't matter what it is. You can't do that stuff if you want to be a pro.
Yeah. And obviously, you've mentioned obviously players who, to be fair, sometimes some players use their draft pick as motivation. In classic case for that is Amon-Ra St. Brown, who literally lists the players who were picked ahead of him, and that's his motivation day in, day out to be better than them all. And like he has mentioned this, I think it was on one of those things, was it the receiver? I think he was on, or he was on one of the documentaries, and it was like he literally used that as his motivations to go to work every day to be better each day. So it is interesting that mindset you mentioned there about the draft, because yeah, he uses that as that kind of motivation. But now I'd like to move on to the growth of the game internationally. So we talked about obviously what the growth, the draft, and in the US, but the game has grown internationally. And obviously you're someone who has personal understanding of what the international game means, having a son currently playing who's signed for a team over in Hungary, for example, playing in the European League. How impressed have you been with the growth of the game internationally, not just in regards to the league, like the European leagues, but more like the fan bases you're seeing internationally compared to being just in America?
I was over in Germany last August for 20 some days watching my son play in Germany. And that was in the German league, and he's moving up to the European League of Football. I think that it's starting to get traction in Europe. The
Hmm.
NFL, football, people understand the game. And women understand the game. There's just as many ladies at the game as there are men, and they're very passionate fans, even for their local teams. Okay, that's what this is all about. You know, fantasy football. I love fantasy football. I play fantasy football, but you root for players instead of teams,
Yeah.
right? Gambling. A lot of times you're rooting for players and props and for props and whatnot. And it kind of like you might be betting on a team or whatever the case may be. But the bottom line is the the foundation of football in America, the NFL game, is ride or die with your team.
Yeah.
You said you're an Eagles fan.
Yeah.
Are you only an Eagles fan because they won the Super Bowl?
No. I'm an Eagles fan because I've got a story about why I'm an Eagles fan, to be fair. The Eagles played in London in the 80s. They played a friendly in Wembley Stadium versus the Cleveland Browns. My dad was working the stadium as a steward that day, and he had photos of the Eagles players. He had photos of like Randall Cunningham, like Reggie White, players of that generation. And I was
Mhm.
looking at these players as a kid and became an Eagles fan. And I've stuck with them since the 80s and since I was a little kid to where I am now, where I'm a very, very happy Eagles fan.
So
I'm just so much happier.
you were a very frustrated, happy and frustrated Eagles fan. When Andy Reid was taking him to the NFC Championship 4 years in a
Yeah.
row, and they couldn't get over the hump, and Donovan McNabb, all those kind of things. So the bottom line is that is going to determine the success of the NFL in Europe. If they do expansion, is can the communities, can the countries go all in on these teams? Can they get to know the players? Can they fall in love with the team? So, like Jacksonville's been over there a bunch, but if Jacksonville's playing over there 2 games a year just to, try to look like we're trying to do some expansion, at some point in time, the fans are like, we want our own team. Okay. If Jacksonville doesn't want to be here, we want our own team. If the NFL wants us to support their league, we want our own team. And
Mhm.
I think the NFL is trying to figure out, how do we do it? Do we put four teams over there? And that way they're not traveling as much. And then when teams travel over, they can stay there for a couple weeks and hit a
Yeah.
couple games before they fly back. There's a couple things that are going on in the NFL that the average fan doesn't realize. It's It's really the mental health of the players and the physical health of the players. And when you are playing more games and you've got short time spans between games, playing a Sunday and a Thursday night game, or you're traveling overseas and you've got the jet lag, it's a real deal. It's a real deal. I don't know how, until they come up with something where you could do an IV or blood infusion and avoid jet lag. It's real.
Yeah.
And it's dangerous. If players are coming back and they're not really, their sleeping patterns are off, their time clock's off, and they're expected to go out and perform, that's when injuries happen.
Yeah.
So I think the biggest thing is it's doable. And I think the NFL will do it and should do it. But I think Europe needs their own teams. I wouldn't
do.
want you to have Jacksonville.
I
London should
think
have their own team.
I first think the only way it works in effect you have two new conferences, one to the AFC, one to the NFC, and you have in effect a North American additional conference with teams in maybe Canada, Mexico, Brazil, or sorry, that's South America, but like an America's conference, and then you have a European one with Ireland, London, Germany, France, or Spain. Do you know what I mean? And then give that, because then obviously they will play each other each twice a season, so that reduces some of the travel time. You have the pairing matchups, don't you, between conferences as well. So you roster the teams so they spend longer in Europe, as you mentioned there. I think you can't just do one team for this to work because it just wouldn't. I am curious what happens with the Jags with the stadium rebuild. Do they do 4 games in London or whether they spend all the rest of the time more in like, is it Orlando? I think they're supposed to be going to for their games. Whether they do extra games in London to compensate for the stadium rebuild as a bit of a test ground as well. Because I've seen examples where sports have tried this. There was a rugby league, a sport that is over here, that there was a team from Toronto that played in the Super League in the UK. It was one season and COVID came in and kind of killed that season out. But what was interesting about it was the fact that they basically played all their home games back to back and then basically lived in Europe for the rest of it. So there has been sports tried. So it'd be interesting to see what happens in that space. But the fan bases definitely are over here. But the problem you will have is getting fans to switch loyalties. I'm an Eagles fan. I've got a Steelers fan. We've got a Patriots fan in our group. We've got a Giants. Poor him. We've got a Packers fan. Do you know what I mean? These fan bases, they're our teams. They're who we support. Yes, if a team was in London, we would get in the soft spot for them, like the Jags. When the Jags come over here, I like seeing the Jags, but would they be my team? No. So that's the hardest bit. You have to get the younger generations invested in the team that is there to kind of get rid of us people who've been long tooths in the game, supporting our same teams for a long while. But yeah, it'd be interesting to see. So we're going to now talk on a little bit before I let you go, because obviously you were an agent for 30 years, but now you talk about the pro mindset. Obviously, you are a keynote speaker. You've got a book. You've got a podcast. You do coaching. You're a very, very busy guy. Now, even though it's no longer in as well as agency. So, how did you get into that side of it, being like a keynote speaker and the pro mindset?
Well, I've got to run here in about 30 seconds. So I'm going to give you the
Not a
30-second deal. When you represent guys for 30 years and your livelihood depends on signing the right guys, you'd start digging deeper than height, weight, speed. You go deeper than even scouts, because they can have an opinion about a player. If he doesn't pan out, they don't lose any money. Doesn't hurt their business. Okay. If you're the GM and you're drafting guys and they're the wrong guys, you can get fired.
Yeah.
But I started learning from my guys that were not drafted or late rounders that had 10-year careers, and wondered what was their secret sauce. And what it really boils down to is, for everybody to be great, and you can be great, I can be great, you've got to play it, you got to perform at your potential.
Yeah.
And there's a gap between potential and production in everything, especially in sports. And it really frustrating for teams or fans when players have the potential but they don't perform at that level. Mm-hmm. So pro mindset is about closing that gap. It's about rewriting your story, elevating your standards so that you can win on stage by closing that potential gap and helping people understand how can they perform at the level of their potential.
Yeah. And so obviously, thank you very much for that. Obviously, please do make sure you check out Craig's website, and obviously to learn more about it, make sure you get in contact with him to try to book him to be a keynote speaker, whether you want him as a coach or simply to buy his book. But thank you very much for your time. They do truly appreciate it. And we're back soon with another special guest.